How's it going, everyone? Here's another little something I have for all of you for the start of for phase two for Evo Hitting Academy. Before we start getting into the little video and the reading here, just want to mention in this new session of emails for phase two, we have a few new cast of Evo Academy members that are going to be joining us. We have a few returners as well. So for those of you that are returning, welcome back. I'm going to be seeing everyone tomorrow for their hitting stations with Coach Gedman, just to hand out the phase two packets, like what we see here on the screen, and just helping with the production of the Pelotero programs. And while I'm just providing another update with the beginning of phase two, we're just basically going to keep things going along while at the same time trying to get all the newcomers just up to date with what we're doing, which are just weekly videos that give a little further context in regards to the packets that you're going to be receiving. And for this week, for phase two, week one, as you see as its title, it's called Disassociation. So this one has a little bit of a vocabulary term that I can describe into a little bit. And it's a little bit of a topic that me personally, I can talk about kind of a lot because it's something that I see a lot with hitters, or really us just as coaches and instructors in general over at Evolution. And the way that the term disassociation is implied, how it is interpreted, I think there's some really good examples that we can provide for you, just to give a little better context and to really bring a definition to this term that's stated here in the overview purpose section. It's certainly something considered important that can create some good mechanical advantages and what it can lead to, like what's bolded underneath for people with shorter swings that have a little more adjustability to recognize pitches, create better decisions. And I'm kind of taking the last one, more adjustability, in with the other part of having more time to recognize. That can kind of run a little synonymous, having more time to recognize pitches and adjustability. And this one section right here where it reads, the hip/midsection are the place where the swings start from, and the ability to disassociate the lower half from the upper half. It's what allows hitters to create these big mechanical advantages. So from just reading into these words, and I'll go a little further on what the objectives are, disassociating between the lower half and the upper half is most likely interpreted as the use of hip-shoulder separation. And I have a few videos that can just provide just a little better understanding of what good examples of hip-shoulder separation can look like and what bad examples can look like. With your objectives here, you certainly want to discover your ranges, find your ranges, which is a theme that was part of phase one. Having a better understanding with this or when I say a better understanding, having a better feel for this and you practicing it can really lead you to things that are helping you within your swing, because creating proper disassociation can lead to spacing that allows the barrel to come through. Bad disassociation can get that barrel stuck behind. Bad disassociation can actually lose that adjustability. So when you follow along with these objectives here of feeling your lower half leading the swing, letting the arms and the bat go for the ride, and understanding these personal swing cues that allow you to create your best movements, that last part is really the biggest emphasis here, and paying attention so that you're not really creating bad movements for you. So this disassociation is really kind of that part where we talk about where hitting is a lifestyle, and it's certainly some things to pay attention to. And certainly don't feel frustrated at all if you're creating some bad moves, because it could be just as valuable to create moves on what not to do that can get you better in tune of what actually works for you. Here's some examples. I'll start with something that actually doesn't have to do with baseball. I'll move myself out of the way here. We'll start with golf, because this is where this was first discovered, where hip-shoulder separation was something that was started to be a quantifiable and applicable thing. It was first seen within golf, particularly as I just Google upswing golf images and I just pick an image. When you get to this position in the golf swing, there's actually something considered called the X factor. And when you have your shoulders and your hips moving in counter opposite directions or creating rotation in one direction, there's actually like an axis that can be captured. And it's really measured in a number of degrees. So when the shoulders go back, they travel a little further than how the hips would be traveling on the backswing when you get to the upswing, like within this visual. And just from what I've heard, to reference, it's from TPI, so there's a pretty credible thing. The number of degrees that exist between this separation, it's minimal. It's something along the lines of as little as 3 to 4 degrees and as much as 6 to 8 degrees. So from close up, we're talking about very, very minute differences of degrees in regards for the distance that's created. And then when the actual swing is created, when the actual swing starts, so after this upswing, when the hands and the club head start to go down, within a very short amount of time, there's actually a little bit more separation that's created. And then the difference, when that motion is created, there's like a negative counter rotation. So when you look at the negative counter rotation with the initial separation that's already created, you're looking at a difference of somewhere between 6 and 7 degrees. So when you look about that 6 and 7 degree range, and then when an actual initiation is created, we're talking about like a negative 10 degree difference of counter action. Still very small differences, even when the violent action of the swing is being occurred in a very, very short pocket of time. There are things that are being disassociated. And for athletes of very high levels, this is something that's very in tune. For those of you that are really undergoing your journey, this is why it's valuable to pay attention to some things, because if we are to take information like hip shoulder separation without really having a full understanding and context, it can be emphasized in something that doesn't really need to be emphasized too much, and it can lead to longer swings and it can lead to injury. So when I go back to just this PDF right here and what some of the advantages that can be created, these are all very, for a lot of instances, very passive actions. These are things that we are already doing, but we can use them to our advantage to create those shorter swings, to create a little more adjustability, and paying attention to them can allow us to have better control and harness over it. However, if we are just creating hip shoulder separation for the sake of it, because we want to create more torque, for example, which is a very common reason why, it can cause a lot more consequence. And I know this personally just from my experience, which is a couple of visuals that I'm just going to be showing you. Last week I did the slide presentation, so I thought this would go pretty well just from adding on to it. Some of these videos that I provided are just from hitters that I've seen do some moves in the past. So like what I kind of mentioned here, just with the little title, you can literally create hip shoulder separation, but you may not need to. And there's just a message that's added, finding your ranges. For under the context of this batter, for example, this was a good example of what disassociation can look like when it's not very monitored and we're just looking to separate our lower half and the upper half without the right meaning. These are just examples of long swings, and then later on would lead to injury, because from the amount of torque that's actually created from the hips traveling forward, separating from the shoulders, it can create a lot of strain on the lower back. So something that I've kind of seen just for firsthand instruction, when the emphasis of hip shoulder separation can be created, and when you have the emphasis of using a very active disassociation to put on fast swings, it's very much like taking a Ferrari and driving it incredibly fast, and not knowing whether or not the brakes necessarily work. You're putting yourself at a little bit of a risk here. When you take something that's already most likely pretty passive of a move and you start to make it more active. To give a little comparison, which may not be fair for this individual, but it's all good, because these are some ranges that could be found. Some slight little differences that are just going to be made. I stopped pool host here in this example to just recognize where the barrel is and where the shoulders are when the pool host video ends and we have that leg basically at that bent L position. For the still image here, the biggest difference is that when those hips start being separated, you notice the person with the gold shirt on the right, the shoulders are still square. They didn't go anywhere, and neither did the bat, which creates a long swing. not necessarily short. Albert over here on the left side, however, by the time he gets to his bent leg position, you notice that the barrel is already getting past the hands. It's already along for the ride, if you will. The shoulders are already turning, and the hands or barrel are going to eventually outrace the hips, which is something that isn't happening here in our example to the right. Just good indicators to pay attention to. Goes back to the old adage position of staying square, because when that swing is actually going to be created, there is separation that's going to occur. And in some other videos that I'm going to show you, you may see what could be a little bit of a leakage or a little bit of a sneak going into foot strike. And there's just 2 points to be with that. Very good hitters are very good compensators. And these are only allowed and acceptable because these are the moves that are working for this person. Just because someone is landing completely square doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot afford to create that disassociation where the hips are staying closed and the shoulders are staying closed and the hips are starting to open up a little bit so that you can create that space for that barrel to go through. That's fine. It's just something to pay attention to so that we don't have any examples here like on the right. Here's just some other little differences when those hips kind of start to get going. The person here on the left has a little bit of a weak front side with that left leg, where when the hips start to turn and create that disassociation, the left leg is literally getting out of the way. You may notice that the ball is placed on a tee, and all that they can really do is kind of take a pull side hit to the left side here, versus the individual here on the right. Shows a pretty good example here of the hips that are starting to be moving along, and while the shoulders are staying closed, and they're really rotating firm into a front side. The back leg doesn't really get too far out ahead of the barrel. It's almost like it's working a little bit in unison, just from the eye of the video and what things are being created. But when in regards to this objective, under this context for the hitter for the right, there was an act to get the hips moving a little bit more and having that initiation to create separation within those hips and those shoulders. It may not necessarily be a bad thing. You just have to you just need to pay attention to the movements that are being created in alignment with your thoughts. With the last little slide here, I thought these three videos were just good examples of what staying square and what proper disassociation can look like, and maybe a little more minute. And yes, the person on the left is indeed swinging a sledgehammer. It just kind of goes a little further towards those objectives that you can meet, but also just in regards to sake for injury, because I've used this image of the person swinging the sledgehammer, where if they are really trying to move their hips forward while keeping their shoulders closed and really having a big emphasis of disassociation where it goes too far, this person is taking a sledgehammer up against a giant chain here that serves as an anchor for a carrier ship. And if they're going to try to separate their hips from that, this person's going to be hurt. This is actually a very efficient move where separation and dissociation is actually occurring. You can even see from this video here where the shoulders are staying closed and almost counter-rotating, similar to like what you would find within the golf swing example when you get to the upswing. There's already some disassociations that are happening. And then keeping them and getting things going into foot strike is what's kind of further explained along in these the video of these two hitters right here. I'll go back to the PDF. So with this emphasis of dissociation, it is indeed a huge mechanical advantage until it isn't, and you're making it a really big emphasis towards something that you may not need to have that much emphasis to. But we need to be aware. And when shorter swings are created, when you do have that adjustability or time to recognize pitches, that's when you know you're in a good place. And that's what just this week can kind of have a little bit of an emphasis on. And for those of you that are watching this for the first time, I do have supplemental videos that I'm going to be providing later on from phase one. If you are interested in watching it and listening to them, every single lesson, if you will, does have questions at the end for you to reflect on. These are all things that are going to be included in on your packet. And this is the just the conclusion of the video for phase two, week one. I will be providing another one next week. I'm going to see all of you players tomorrow. And if you have any questions before then, please reach out. All right, have a good one.